Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. Saul had it out for David. His animosity, driven by his jealousy and fear of David, kept revealing itself in ever more intense efforts to take David's life. He had tried to kill David with a spear twice. Now he was going to issue an order that all of his servants do whatever they had to do to see that David was eliminated. Saul even ordered his own son Jonathan to take the life of his best friend David. All of this reveals Saul's growing desperation and despondency. He had been rejected by God because of his disobedience, and he knew his days on the throne were numbered. Saul was seeking every opportunity to kill David, all in a futile effort to prolong his reign. And even when Jonathan convinced his father to rescind his order to kill David, it was little more than a delay, the calm before the storm. And 1 Samuel 19, verses 1 through 10, ends with Saul trying for a third time to nail David to the wall with a spear. He missed, but David didn't take any chances and fled for his life. It was about time for David to give up his position in the palace. His days of learning how not to be a king were quickly coming to an end. God was going to separate David from Saul and begin the process of divine preparation that would equip him for his God-ordained role as the shepherd of Israel. David had to have been one confused young man. On two separate occasions, the king of Israel had tried to pin him to the wall with a spear, but then the same man turned around and offered his daughter's hand in marriage. Yet David's demureness and subsequent delay caused Saul to give his daughter to another man. But this was followed up by Saul offering to David his younger daughter Michal, who David eventually married. He became the son-in-law of the king. He was part of the royal family and best friends with the king's own son. And yet, unbeknownst to David, Saul was continually plotting ways to rid himself of his new son-in-law, who he believed posed a major threat to his reign. Perhaps David simply wrote it all off as nothing more than a symptom of Saul's fits of rage. After all, David had originally been hired to serve as Saul's music therapist, playing his harp in order to calm the king when he had one of his bouts of uncontrolled anger. He would have known firsthand just how violent Saul could become. Even when Saul had attempted to kill David with a spear, he probably convinced himself to not take it personally. He had just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But things were much worse than David knew. Saul was so desperate to eliminate David that he commanded his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill him. Basically, he ordered a hit on David. He put a bounty on his head and brought in reinforcements. But Jonathan took this news hard. He and David were best friends. He was being commanded by his father and king to kill someone he cared deeply about. It's interesting to note that Jonathan, the heir to the throne of Saul, didn't perceive David as a threat. He didn't share his father's paranoia regarding David. In fact, he pleaded with his father to reconsider and reminded him of all that David had done for him. "The king must not sin against his servant David," Jonathan said. "He's never done anything to harm you. He has always helped you in any way that he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill the Philistine giant, and how the Lord brought a great victory to all of Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Why would you murder an innocent man like David? There's no reason for it at all." 1 Samuel 19, verses 4 through 5. And Saul seemed to listen to the words of Jonathan, vowing to spare David's life and welcoming him back into his presence as before. But this happy reunion would prove to be short-lived. It would simply be the calm before the storm. The king whom God had rejected and the man whom God had anointed as his replacement were not going to be able to coexist for long. Eventually, Saul was going to have to go away. He was the one who would have to be eliminated, not David. God's plan to place David on the throne of Israel was not going to be curtailed or compromised by anyone or anything. But things were going to get worse before they got better. While things appeared to have gone back to normal, with David winning victories over the Philistines by day and playing his harp for Saul in the evenings, the animosity of Saul remained unchanged. And eventually, in one of his tormented moments, Saul attempted to kill David for the third time, forcing David to run for his life yet again. And this would prove to be a foreshadowing of David's life for years to come. He was about to discover that his lot in life was to be that of a man on the run. He was to become a fugitive, a wanted man with a price on his head, and a relentless pursuer on his trail, who would stop at nothing until David was dead. But David must have looked back on his anointing by Samuel and wondered what it all meant. Why had the prophet chosen him? What had the anointing meant? What had he been anointed for? David must have assumed that he had been chosen by God to be a great military leader, having killed Goliath and given us numerous victories over the Philistines since becoming a commander in Saul's army. But why would God give him success in battle and then allow him to suffer at the hands of his own king? How was he supposed to do his job when he was constantly having to worry about the king killing him? All of this must have created a great deal of confusion in the mind of David and led him to have some frank and open conversations with God. In fact, because of all that David was about to experience, he would learn to talk to God with an honesty and openness that only suffering can create. Many of his psalms reflect the nature of his relationship with God, revealing his total transparency and somewhat shocking honesty. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Psalm 13, verses 1 and 2. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Psalm 22, verses 1 through 2. I pray to you, O Lord, my rock, do not turn a deaf ear to me. For if you are silent, I might as well give up and die. Psalm 28, verse 1. David was going to learn to trust God, but first he was going to learn to be honest and open with God. David would discover his own limitations and come to grip with his own weaknesses the hard way. His anointing by Samuel was just the beginning of his preparation. The Spirit of God coming upon David was instrumental in his early success, but the Spirit of God transforming the heart and character of David was going to be the key to his future rule and reign. What would eventually make David a great king are the lessons he would learn while on the run. The time he spent hiding in caves would play a vital role in preparing him for the crown. David was going to learn a lot about himself over the next few years, but he was going to learn even more about God. What would eventually make him a great king would be his understanding of the greatness of God.